Hey, this is Dave Linhart from Life Phase Media. Hey, customers are always asking me, what is the deal with advanced targeting? Why is there so much hype about it and so much hoopla? So to answer that question, I put together a quick example that we can walk through together to explain the fundamentals of advanced targeting and why you should care about it as a marketer. Take, for example, a ringtone campaign. After the campaign was finished, we went back and looked at the data. So we extracted the data and we created a simple chart. We put age on the x-axis and sales on the y-axis. And what we uncovered was pretty interesting. We found a downward trend as we plotted these two metrics against each other. In other words, the older the customer group was, the less likely they were to be interested in ringtones. Conversely, the younger the customer, the more likely they were to be interested in ringtones. If you can remember from geometry class, you can explain this equation, this line, this relationship, with an equation. In this case, with two dimensions and a straight line, the equation is y equals mx plus b, where y is the y-axis, x is the x value, m is the slope of the line, and b is the intercept. Now you don't need to remember what all the variables mean. What you need to take away from this equation is the fact that it is an equation. We've been able to develop an equation that predicts consumer behavior. So if you have the answers to the equation on the right side of the equal sign, the x value, in other words the age, you can calculate what the sales are likely to be. And from a marketing perspective, that's incredibly powerful. So let's take a look at this simple equation and what it might do for the business. A lift chart is a common way to look at the impact of advanced targeting on campaigns. Instead of using a two-line graph, we're going to use graph paper. So on the x-axis, we're going to plot cumulative audience, cumulative percent of audience, starting at 0, going to 100%, and on the y-axis, we're going to plot cumulative sales. So what would you expect to happen as we started contacting these audience, assuming that we weren't using age targeting at all, that we were just randomly exposing these consumers to the offer? You might expect a line that looks like this. As you call or expose 10% of the audience to the offer, you would expect to generate 10% of the total sales. As you expose 20% of the audience to the offer, you would expect 20% of the sales. This is what we call the random case, where you know nothing about the customer and you aren't targeting the offer in any way. You're just giving it to everyone or serving it in a random fashion. Now, what would you expect if instead of doing that, instead of using a random approach, that we actually called the young people first or exposed the young segment of the audience to the ringtone offer first and left the older folks for later? What would that graph look like? Would you expect it to be higher and go above this black line or below? Here's an example of what the graph looks like when we applied our age demographic to the campaign. As we contacted 10% of the audience, or exposed 10% of the audience to the offer, we saw a whopping 30% of the sales. And you'd expect that, because as we've learned from the previous slide, age is a predictor of whether you're likely to be interested in this ringtone offer. So if we target the young people first, you would expect that our results would be greater than 10 if we're 10% of the way through the audience. And you can see the increases fade off as we get further into the audience, targeting the older folks, and eventually end up at 100%. Now think about what this means from a targeting perspective. At the 20% level, when we've only exposed 20% of the people to the audience, we're no longer on this black line here. We're way up on this red line, which is what we call the lift chart, or the lift curve. And at 20% of the audience, we've generated 50% of the sales. Think about that. We only contacted 20% of who was available, and we generated half of the sales. Similarly, what happens if we go to 50% of the audience? Following the line up, we're going to generate 90% of the sales. Think about that. We can expose just half of the audience to this offer, and we will generate 90% of the revenue. So the top 20% makes up 50% of all sales. The top 50% makes up 90% of all sales. This is an interesting chart, but what does it mean for the business? Let's take this first case where we contacted only 20% of the audience. As we've shown, that 20% is going to make up 50% of the sales. Let's say we're running a cost per impression campaign. This could be a banner ad campaign, could be an email campaign, something where you're paying for every impression that is served. The big question you have, of course, as an advertiser, is do these impressions convert? What does it do to our acquisition costs? We know that we're going to pay when the impression is served, whether or not there's a sale, or regardless if there's a sale. And so we want to know how many sales are we getting and what is our acquisition cost efficiency. A simple example would be, let's say, assume our cost to serve these impressions was $10 per thousand. And let's say before we used our age targeting equation, we delivered or purchased 10,000 impressions. And those 10,000 impressions generated 100 sales. The cost per sale in this example is pretty straightforward. Take the 10,000 impressions, we're paying $10 per thousand. So you remember, you just drop the zeros. 10 times 10 is 100. Divide by 100 sales, and that gives you an acquisition cost or a cost per sale of $1 per sale per order. Instead of following the random case and sending the offer to everybody and letting those 10,000 impressions hit every consumer, let's say we use the age as a screener, that our ad server had a way to only serve the ad to folks of a certain age, or at least serve them first. Now remember, we're only targeting 20% of the audience, not 100%. So the impressions are 20% of 10,000 available, or in this case 2,000 impressions. And instead of generating 100 sales, we're only going to generate 50% of the sales, or in this case 50 sales. What happens to our cost per sale? Our cost per sale is 2,000 impressions times the same $10 per thousand. That generates 50 sales at an average acquisition cost of 40 cents per sale. So after targeting 40 cents, before targeting $1, 60% reduction in acquisition cost. Now these numbers are pretty small, $1, 40 cents. But let's add a couple zeros. What if you had a $10 million marketing budget and you were able to save $6 million by getting a more efficient campaign for only $4 million? A 60% reduction in acquisition costs. What business wouldn't benefit greatly from that? Now let's look at the other side of the equation. Let's say you're running a CPA campaign or a cost per sale campaign through an affiliate network, or perhaps a cost per lead campaign using lead generation offers. As an advertiser, you've got your acquisition costs locked. That's the great benefit of a CPA campaign. The problem is the publishers may not be willing to run your offer because it won't generate any revenue. So the question now is, what is the average revenue per impression, or ECPM? And ECPM is an industry term. It's somewhat of a misnomer, but what it really means is how much revenue is the publisher making per 1,000 impressions. Let's assume we were paying a bounty on the CPA campaign, and that bounty was $1 per sale. Before using our age targeting predictive model, we generated 100 sales at $1 per sale using the numbers from above. And it took us 10,000 impressions to do that, which brought our ECPM to $10. After targeting, we only generated 50 sales, but we did so over 2,000 impressions, resulting in an ECPM of $25. That's a 150% increase, or another way to say it is a 2.5 times increase in ECPM. How many publishers do you know would be interested in serving the same impressions but generating 2.5 times increase in their revenue? So here's the bottom line with advanced targeting. In this example, advanced targeting results in a 60% reduction in acquisition costs for advertisers running CPM campaigns, 150% or 2.5 times increase in eCPMs for publishers running CPA campaigns. By using advanced targeting to develop multiple offer profiles, publishers and advertisers can increase gross revenue and margins. So there you have it. What advanced targeting is, what it can do for your business, and why you should care about it. Thanks for your time. This is Dave Linhart from LifePhase Media.